Hi guys, my name is Ben Guilford. I'm the owner of the Firebrick Company, and in this video we're going to show you how to set up the optional steel stand for your precast oven kit. We're also going to show you how to cut out and position the calcium silicate insulation board that goes under the oven, and how to lay the tiles that make up the oven floor. The first thing that I want to bring up, and I do bring it up in our other videos and in the written instructions, we do stress it, but I really want to take the opportunity to bring it up in this video as well, is building in a cold climate. If you're building in an area that experiences significant cold, so by that I mean you experience full-on freezing conditions, not just a light frost on the ground that disappears by mid-morning, but where the ground freezes down to a certain depth, and houses are built to accommodate it. If you live in an area like that, then you really need to build the oven in such a way that it's kept dry at all times. We really want to make sure that you know that 100%, that there's no question around that. If you live in a cold climate that gets really properly cold, you need to keep the oven dry at all times. And that would probably mean building a roof over it, building a structure over the oven to prevent any rain from falling on it. The reason for that is, despite our water barrier, which is very good, the front of the oven is made of firebrick, and firebrick by its very nature is porous. It will soak up water, it will soak that water up, and that water will actually end up down in your calcium silicate board layer. And if you went into winter with an oven that was holding water in that calcium silicate insulation board, that water will freeze, it will expand significantly, and you'll end up with very serious damage to your oven. So you really need to take that into consideration. If you're in an area that experiences that heavy freezing, then you need to build the oven in such a way that it's kept dry at all times. There are a few ways you could go about building a stand to put your P85 precast oven on. Of course, you could do brick walls and a suspended concrete slab like we do for our brick ovens. That would be overkill, but it looks great, and if that's the way you want to build it, and if that's going to tie in with the area around your oven, then go for it. There's great instructions on our website, which hopefully are useful to you, and we've done some videos as well on how to go about doing that. In this video, what we want to show you is how to set up our optional steel frame kit that we have for the P85. So you'll see behind me the steel frame. We are now using an 18mm compressed cement sheet as our benchtop, and it's a really simple thing to install. Now here in our showroom, which is where we're building this particular oven, we've got a concrete foundation already set up. However, if you don't have that, if you're building this into an outdoor area and you're just looking at the ground, you can just do 4 concrete footings, and we've got a video to show you how you can do that. So once you've got your steel frame level and you've used shims to make sure it's not rocking, it's sitting nice and solid, then you're ready to put on the benchtop. Now our benchtop is made of 18mm compressed cement sheet, which is CNC cut to the dimensions of the stand, and all you need to do is just put down some liquid nails or suitable adhesive on top of the steel frame, and then you can land the cement sheet on top of that. Once you've got that in place, then you just allow it enough time to set before you move on and start building the oven, so that the cement sheet isn't moving around on you. If you're wanting to get straight into it, you want to land that cement sheet and bang, start building the oven right away, maybe just drill a couple of holes through the cement sheet and put some self-tapping screws into the steel frame just to stop it from sliding around. And that will give it more than enough support to allow you to start the build of the oven itself. So as you can see, using the steel frame is pretty easy. We've made it as easy as we can. And this is one of the benefits actually of the P85 oven over its big brick oven brothers, is that building the stand takes a matter of minutes. So the first thing that we want to do to actually start building the oven, we've got our stand behind us, ready to go. Now, remember, your stand may look a little different to this. Actually, have a look on our website. We've done a whole lot of work around different stand designs, so giving you designs you could build into a corner. Obviously, we've got our steel frame system up there that you can see. You also got different layouts that you could use with bricks or concrete blocks to create your own stand. But the principle is the same, regardless of the shape of your stand. You want your oven to end up in the right spot. And this is the point that we figure that out. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to put a center line straight down the middle of the stand. So we'll just measure the width and halve that, and we'll give ourselves a line front to back, and we're going to use that line to place our calcium silicate insulation board on and get that centered so that our oven is sitting where we want it. Your P85 precast oven kit comes with calcium silicate board, which is a high temperature insulation material. It's kind of similar sort of consistency to chalk, and it's an incredible high temperature insulator. You can put an oxy torch on one side of this. I'll happily put my hand on the other side of it. So to actually cut it out to the right shape, we provide you with paper templates. So you get these, and you've got to cut these templates following the dashed lines. We're then going to pin that onto the calcium silicate board using the drawing pins that are provided with your kit. And then we'll get a jigsaw and we're going to cut following the thick lines to give us the actual piece that we're after. Then if we refer to our instructions here, it will show us how to go about setting out those pieces so that they are, in the right position for the oven. So we're going to cut our calcium silicate board now. You can cut it with a range of different tools. You could cut this with a wood saw if you really wanted to. I like using a jigsaw because it's quick and easy, and I have one kicking around. This is one of those fun jobs where you get to use all of your tools. If you have them around, they're very handy. Definitely want to just talk very quickly about safety, and we do talk about it in the written instructions. Please, guys, make sure you read our written instructions. Go through the safety stuff. We're not just putting it in there to cover ourselves. We're generally putting it in there so that we're taking care of you, and you're making sure you do this in a way that's safe and doesn't do you any harm. The first thing I'd recommend is having a really good dust mask. Now, this is a reusable mask. It's a good quality one. You can get something like this from your local hardware store for a surprisingly reasonable price. And it's just a lot better than the disposable masks. The disposable ones don't tend to seal around your face very well. These really do. So very much recommend you wear one of these when you're cutting the calcium silicate board, when you're handling any of the dusty components of the kit, be that the mortar mixture, the castable, the perlite, even cement and sand and lime. It's always good to wear a mask so that you're not inhaling unnecessary dust. So you also want to have some safety glasses so you protect your eyes. But again, guys, use some common sense. Take your time, don't rush it, and just make sure you're working in a safe manner. CalSil board's all cut, and now we want to position it on the stand. So we've got our center line already marked on the stand, and we can use these center lines that are printed on these sheets to line up on that center line. So the same principle applies if you're building into a corner. You'll have a line going down the center of the slab, and you can just use the center lines that are printed on these sheets to give you your alignment. Now, the other thing that is mentioned in the plans and on these templates, you'll find some instructions about positioning it and allowing a certain distance from the edge of your stand to the start of the calcium silicate board. And so we want to make sure that we're allowing that gap from the edge of the stand to the calcium silicate board. Check the written instructions for that dimension. Okay, again, these videos are to complement the written instructions. You really need to read those written instructions as well as watch these videos. So please make sure you download those and have a really good read of them before you make a start. All right, so we're going to make sure we've got our clearance from the sides and from the back. A question we occasionally get is, oh, how much room should I leave at the front of the oven? Now, usually, what I would normally say is, well, push the oven as far back as you can on your stand, so you still have your clearance at the back, because remember, we have to put our insulation blanket and our perlite render has to come down over this, so we need to allow a certain gap. And give yourself as much room at the front for a landing as you can. That applies up until the point where you have a stand that's really, really deep. So if you have a stand that's, say, 2 meters deep for a P85, I wouldn't recommend pushing the P85, 600 millimeters or 2 feet back on the stand, because that means the oven is just miles away from you when you're, trying to get pizzas in and out or check on your food. So basically, usually the maximum landing that I would recommend in front of the oven, so that's the gap from the front edge there to the front edge of the stand, maximum I would usually go to is about 400 millimeters. That's more than enough landing than you need. All right, so again, check the written instructions for some more detail around that, but we're basically ready to start laying our floor tiles. Next step that we need to do is to cover the calcium silicate board with a layer of aluminium foil. Just simple aluminium foil straight out of your kitchen, doesn't have to be anything special. The idea of the foil is not that it's not providing any additional insulation or anything like that. All it's doing is just providing a temporary waterproof barrier between the calcium silicate board and the mortar that we're about to use to bed down the fire brick tiles. If we put mortar directly on top of this surface, it will dry out like that, and we'll have no opportunity to actually bed our tiles in and get them all sitting nice and flat. So cover it with aluminium foil. You've got plenty of drawing pins left, so you can use your thumbtacks to pin the foil down, and then make sure you seal the joints with masking tape. All right. Now it is, depending on the foil you're using, it can be a little fragile, so just be very careful with it. If you make any holes in it while you're doing this, hey, just cover them up with a little bit of masking tape. We're using paper masking tape because this is probably the safest tape that we could use, rather than using, say, a plastic tape where we may get, plastic sort of toxins drawn up into the oven. We've just got good old-fashioned paper, so nothing really in here that's going to do us any harm should it get really hot and deteriorate. So to bed our floor tiles down, we're going to be using a hybrid refractory mortar mixture. You're going to find all the details for that mixture in our written instructions, which you can download from our website. The link's in the description. And we're going to use that mixture to bed the floor tiles down and get them all flat and level with each other. Some oven builds have you just bed the bricks down on sand, and we don't want our floor tiles to move around over time. We want them to be sitting nice and solid, so we're going to bed them down in this hybrid refractory mortar mixture. The mix you're going to need is the air-set refractory mortar. You'll find it's clearly labelled air-set mortar, and this is the material that you're going to be using to bed down your floor tiles. Now, this is part of a hybrid mixture. We get you to mix the air-set with Portland cement, washed sand and hydrated lime. And the idea there is to make a nice thick mix that sets rock hard, but it's also a mix that goes quite a long way. The mixture under the floor is not really to stick the tiles together or anything like that. It's just to provide a leveling surface that sets hard once it cures. So we know our air-set mortar needs to be mixed with Portland cement, hydrated lime and washed sand in order to make the hybrid mixture. But what we wanted to do is go into a little bit more detail on those materials because we have had a few customers get confused. The word cement
means so many things. You could have, super glue is a form of cement, or you have a pre-mixed bag of concrete people think of as being cement. Portland cement is a very specific name, and it refers to a fine powder that is the active ingredient in concrete. It doesn't have any sand, it doesn't have any stone mixed into it, it's pure cement. So if you're going to your hardware store, if you ask for Portland cement, you're going to get the right thing. You don't want anything that's got something mixed into it like sand or aggregate. It's just cement by itself. Okay, the next thing is hydrated lime. And hydrated lime is also called slaked lime or builder's lime. And it's designed for mixing mortar. It gives the mortar more plasticity. And it's also fantastic for making our perlite render later on in the process. And so hydrated lime can be a little bit tricky to find depending where you are. In Australia, you walk into pretty well any hardware store and it's right there and it's cheap and it's just there and just get it and put it in the car. In America, it's a little bit more challenging. We're not sure why. Maybe people bury bodies with it or something. I don't know. I'm not sure why it's so hard to get, but you do not want lime that would be used in your garden. Okay, that's another form of lime. It's a very different material. You don't want a lime that you squeeze. No, it's a white powder. It's a fine white powder. And yeah, hydrated lime is what you're after there. The last thing you need for your hybrid mortar mix is washed sand. And a good question that we get quite a lot is, oh, there's so many types of washed sand out there. Which one should I get? It doesn't matter. Any washed sand will do just fine, as long as it is sand and not a mixture of sand and gravel. My dad brought some washed sand home once to make his oven, and I was looking, I'm like, where did you find this? It had chunks of stones in it. You don't want that, because that'll get in the way of bedding your floor tiles down. That big aggregate will be quite frustrating. So you want well-graded, washed sand. Just make sure you don't buy bricky sand, or anything that has a clay mixed through it. So bricky sand is typically orange or yellow color. So make sure you get some washed sand. It can be playground sand, gap sand, paving sand. There's a whole heap of different types. As long as it's washed sand, it'll do just fine.
So like I've said before, make sure you refer to the written instructions as well as watching these videos when you're doing the build, because there's information that's contained in those instructions that's not in these videos, and vice versa. So we really need you to do both. Watch these videos, but read the written instructions as well, so that you get a full picture of how you're going to assemble this oven. So as always, if we're dealing with dust, so any of the dry materials, we're going to wear our dust mask, got our safety glasses. I'm also going to be busting out some nice rubber gloves when I'm actually laying the tiles, because as you're going to see, the tools that I'm going to be using, mainly my hands. One of the most important pieces of safety equipment that you're going to be using while you're building your wood-fired oven kit is actually a pair of rubber gloves. I've got these from my local supermarket. This is a pair of heavy-duty washing up gloves. They're absolutely fantastic. And the reason we need these is because we are handling mortar, we're handling refractory castable, and those things are quite alkaline and can actually cause chemical burns if we let them. Now, the reason we wear rubber gloves as opposed to, say, gardening gloves is, well, they keep the water out, because while it's very important that we don't touch the mortar, we really don't want to touch that with our hands. It's equally important to keep our hands dry. And this is something that I learned the hard way. I was wearing a pair of the rubber gloves and building one of my ovens, and I got some burns and some sores on my hands anyway. I was like, well, what's going on? I've done the right things. I've taken the precautions. I've worn the gloves. But what I hadn't noticed was water had gotten into the gloves while I was doing the build. And so I was working for hours on end with wet hands. And I don't know if you've looked at your hands in the bath and they've gotten all pruny and soft. And when your skin gets soaking wet, it gets very, very soft. and then let's say you have a little bit of grit in your gloves, well, that grit will rub, and it can effectively give you a sore because your skin, particularly if you have delicate engineer's hands like these bad boys, it can give you sores. So the key here is have 2 pairs of rubber gloves. And so if you do find you get a bit of water into one of them, hey, take it off, turn it inside out so that it can dry your hand off, get another glove and keep going. But just keep that in mind. Keep your hands as dry as you can so that the skin is nice and strong and resistant to any cement or anything that you're touching. The refractory mortar, the refractory castable, these things are not powerful alkalis, but the combination of wet, soft skin and the slight alkalinity of those materials is not a good one. So please guys, make sure, take care of your skin, take care of your hands, get a couple of good quality pairs of rubber gloves and keep your hands nice and dry. About to mix up my mortar, so I've got it all mixed up here, just ready to add some water and get it all combined. Now, one thing, you can mix it with a trowel or a shovel if you want to. We're mixing up a small quantity here, so we could use a trowel and that would be fine. If you do have a mixing drill at home, you're very spoiled, and that's a great thing to have. It's not that you need it, but as an optional tool, it's a great option to have because it just makes the act of mixing this effortless. But for the P85, for our precast oven, it's not a huge amount of material to mix anyway, so it's not too much stress either way. But if you do have one around, it's particularly good for when you're mixing your perlite render later on. It does make life really, really easy. So if you've got one, awesome, bust it out. If you don't, not to worry, we can mix it up with a trowel. So I always recommend, regardless of which method you're using, trowel or drill, make sure you're wearing your safety glasses when you're mixing this stuff because it's very alkaline and getting this in your eyes is highly unpleasant. Mortar is mixed and you're aiming for a nice thick consistency. You don't want a wet, soupy, runny mix, but neither do you want something that's so thick that you can't work with it. So you want something sort of in between. And what we've got here, a really good way of sort of telling is if you can grab a trowelful and hold it upside down without it falling off the trowel, you've got a nice sticky mixture that's going to work really well. If it's too wet, it'll just fall off the trowel as soon as you turn it upside down. Okay, so that's a nice thick mix. So now we're ready to get our floor tiles down. When we're bedding the floor tiles down into the hybrid mortar mixture, we need to have the floor tiles soaked in water to prevent them drying out the hybrid mixture on us. Fire bricks are very porous. You pick them up and you go, wow, they're heavy, they're very dense, but they're also quite porous, surprisingly so. So when you actually soak them in water, you'll see they'll actually bubble. Little bubbles come out of them as the pores in the brick fill with water. So you don't have to soak them very long, and you can just leave them in the tubs until you're ready to use them. So we'll get them soaking now. And while we're talking about tiles, I'd like to say, look, we put an awful lot of effort into picking out tiles that are really good quality and that have very few defects on edges and corners. We try really hard with that, but please understand we ship these all over the world, and we do find that sometimes little edges of the tiles might break off. You may find like a little corner has broken off, and that can happen. So if you do find that you have a tile that maybe has a little chipped corner or something like that, often you can still use it, but you might flip it upside down and put the chip facing down where you'll never ever see it again. Now, guys, if you do find that you've got some major damage to any part of your oven, just let us know. We'll get that sorted out for you. Please don't worry about that. But if you do just have a little chipped corner or something like that, there's often somewhere that you can put that particular brick so that you'll never ever see it. Some tips for laying your floor tiles. First tip I would give you is don't try and lay it on a super thin bed of mortar. If you go for like a 2mm mortar bed, you're going to find it really, really difficult to get the tiles all nice and even, because there is a very small variance in the thickness of the tiles, plus or minus 1.5mm. So you may find that one tile could be even 2 or even 3mm thicker than another. It's rare, but it can happen. So what I usually do is I actually bed the tiles down into quite a thick bed of mortar, about 10mm. And then I've got lots of room to play with, and it's much easier to sort of move the tiles around, tap them down, and get them all nice and level with each other. In terms of the tiles that you're going to lay first, refer to the written instructions and you'll see the layout that we use. But we're going to be starting at the very front of our calcium silicate board, and we're going to use the front edge of the calcium silicate board as a guide to help us get the tiles sitting square and aligned correctly. We've got our center line on the foil that we've redrawn here, we've drawn up from the stand, and we're going to use that as well to help us get our tiles set out correctly. Tools that you'll need, a dead blow mallet or rubber mallet will be really handy to help you tap the tiles down. Please don't use a normal hammer, because you could split a tile in half if you tried hard enough. You'll also want to have a level, and the reason for the level is so that you can get that first tile down correctly, and then all the other tiles are going to follow suit. So what I'm doing here is I want my floor tiles to basically follow the same plane that my stand is on. It turns out that my stand is on a slight lean this way, very slight. And so I'm going to basically use this bubble here in the level and mimic that on that tile. I'm going to get the bubble in the same spot, front to back and left to right, so that my floor tiles are basically following my stand. Then I can move the stand into position later on, and I know that the floor tiles are level with this surface. Now, of course, guys, you can, you might have a bench that's not perfectly level. Maybe it's not level left to right or front to back. And you can choose to lay your floor tiles dead level. That's absolutely fine. Just have a think about how much mortar gap you're going to have under the tiles when you're laying them. I'll give you an example. Let's say that our stand is actually on a lean from the back towards the front, so the back is quite a bit higher. If I lay my first tile and it's dead level, and maybe it's only got a few millimeters of mortar underneath it, as I keep laying them further back, I'm going to run out of mortar gap, because I'm trying to lay them on a slope down, sort of into the insulation board. So just have a think about that. Check your levels on you can check the level on the board itself and see where it's at, and that will really help you laying those floor tiles so that you don't find yourself in a position where you're trying to slam the tiles down into the board and running out of mortar thickness or bed thickness. So what I'm doing here is I'm lining up this face of the brick with the face of the calcium silicate board. You can use a square if you want to do that. I'm just eyeballing it. And the other thing that I'm going to do, so that I make sure that I've got this in the center, is I'm lining up the point of this tile with the center line that we drew before. So some more tips for laying your floor tiles. So like I said before, aim for a nice thick bed of mortar. There's more than enough mortar in your kit, so don't worry, you're not going to run out. And what you're going to be doing is, instead of, if you might have done some tiling maybe in the bathroom, and you spread out your adhesive, and then you get a notched trowel and you notch your adhesive so that it creates sort of gaps that allow you to bed the tiles down, and the gaps sort of push into each other and fill up, which gives you some movement. Now, if we use a notched trowel on this surface, we're just going to tear the foil. So we definitely don't recommend you do that, but you can use your fingers. So that's why I'm wearing some nice washing up gloves here, and I'm actually going to notch this mortar with my finger to give me those gaps that I'm looking for. The other thing that you really should do is notch right against the tile that you're laying against, so that you don't get mortar trying to squish up in between the two tiles, which would sort of force them apart. So ideally we want the tiles to be touching if we can. Don't worry too much about it if you do find you get a millimetre or maybe even a couple of millimetres in between them, but just try and keep them as tight together as you can. But that really helps if you just make sure that you've got nothing in the way here. Makes your life a lot easier. I tend to put in a notch every couple of inches. All right, and again, I'm just being quite gentle because I don't want to tear the foil. You only lay one tile at a time, so don't even think about covering the whole area with mortar and doing it all at once. Make sure you just do just enough area to lay the next tile. So I can see that this side of the tile is sitting up quite high, and so I can get my dead blow mallet and I can just tap that down. Just another thing that I'd like to mention as I'm doing this, this is one of those processes which is very forgiving. So if you lay a tile and you're not entirely happy with it, maybe you knocked it down a little bit too far, or maybe you put too much mortar underneath it and you can't get it down far enough, don't panic. Just lift it off and lay it again. It's one of those really enjoyable projects where there's very few places that you can do something irreversible. We can always lift up the tiles, take the mortar off and lay them again. So don't panic, take your time and enjoy yourself.